Hey, it's Tpok. I am back in true remembrance. We left off with Law running away for no apparent reason so far, so I got up off the sofa, but everything was still really hazy. Sure, I wasn't a morning person, obviously, but it was particularly tough today. Oh, don't get me wrong, I wasn't in a bad mood or anything. It was just part of me was still dreaming, or at least it really felt like it. I couldn't focus on anything. I kept feeling like I'd been listening to someone singing, and I kept feeling like La had been close beside me. So La had to be the singer of the song, right? Except that was completely impossible. This was Maria's song from so long ago. Maybe that's why I felt so ill at ease right now. I got up off the sofa quickly before any more unwanted thoughts rushed into my head. There were sounds coming from the kitchen. Rather, there'd been sounds coming from the kitchen ever since I'd opened my eyes. I could smell eggs and toast being cooked up. It was wonderful. I was starting to get really hungry. This was kind of unexpected. La didn't usually get up early enough to cook breakfast for me. Oh, so La didn't run away? Then who ran away? Maybe it's the Maria. I walked into the kitchen, and sure enough, there La was, the frying pan in hand, and a big smile on her face. Blackiris, good morning. Cold out, isn't it? Good morning. Her voice was cheerful, her smile was warm, but her eyes were puffed and red. Obviously, she'd been crying again. Take a seat, please. Let's eat before it gets cold. She could see that I was worried about her, obviously, but she kept bustling about cheerfully as if nothing had happened. This was her way. I'd learned that much in my time with her, always dancing and sidestepping in order to make sure no one had to fuss over her. But was this not, in its own way, the most silent hypocrisy? For she fussed over each and every person around her. We took coffee after our meal, as it had become our tradition. Now, ever since the first time there, she'd been taking lessons from Rook at Aroma, which was why the drink she offered me grew tastier and tastier by the day. The funny thing was, she never drank the stuff herself. It was always some form of milk for her. If I had to guess, that was because she was painfully aware of how short she was. Silly, of course, she could drink all the milk in the world and it wouldn't help her in that regard, but still admirable in its own way. I took another sip. Silence filled the room. I wanted to ask her about the song. It didn't seem possible. How would she know about, much less be able to sing, that song? But still. La? She looked up at me from her mug of hot milk. It was a total loss for words when I was at a total loss for words when her eyes met mine. How exactly was I going to explain this? I didn't see any way I could do so and still managed to keep Maria out of it, which meant, no, never mind. Okay. She was obviously curious about what I'd been about to say, but she didn't probe any further. This was part of what made her such an ideal guest. She knew when to stop asking questions. Yeah, that's right. She was my guest. It was high time I started treating her like one. So I took care of cleanup after breakfast. Now I was in the middle of doing that when I opened the refrigerator. Oh, wow. We were almost out of food. We'd have nothing to eat at all if I didn't go shopping soon. Hey, La, I'm going to go grocery shopping today. Would you like to come? Oh, actually, I think I'll pass for today. I almost dropped the plate I was washing when I heard this. It wasn't like La to be evasive or refuse to go out. I'd never seen her behaving this way in all the time I'd known her. First breakfast and now this. No matter which way you sliced it, I was in for an interesting day. Still not feeling too well? No, I'm fine. It's just, well, there obviously had to be some reason for why she became tongue-tied this morning, but I decided not to press her on it. I mean, I certainly had days when I didn't feel like going out. Why couldn't she? sorry. And she really did look sorry. So I smiled wryly, shook my head, and said, "Oh, don't worry about it. I'm your guide after all. I'm supposed to do things like this for you. Besides, to be totally honest, I kind of wanted to be alone." I cleared the table and washed the dishes after breakfast. I could feel La's eyes on me as I buttoned up my coat and wrapped my scarf around my neck. When I opened the door to leave, I turned to find her smiling back at me weakly. So who ran away? I have no idea now, because didn't someone run away? It sounded like they did. The sky outside was gray, and the clouds were ready to burst. I'd be lucky if I managed to finish shopping before the snow started falling. I walked towards the trolley station. Every so often, strangers passed me by. There was no one at my side. It had already been a month since La had first come to this town. Enough time to forget my solitude, enough of her to forget that I'd ever walked these streets alone. That was just the problem. Nowadays, I was getting increasingly impatient, just being around her. Oh no, I'm not saying that I was annoyed or bored, far from it, but whenever we weren't making small talk, we were just sitting in each other's company, reading books. We were cut off from the outside world, draped in total silence but for occasional turning of pages. But there was one thing I could always count on. If I were to just call her name, she'd always answer me, with a big smile on her face and warmth in her eyes that could thaw the iciest heart. The problem here was, I was getting awfully used to this. I couldn't understand it. How'd she become this much a part of me? Thus the impatience. Thus why I was making a concerted effort to treat her as my guest. It might be days, or weeks, or even months, but she'd be leaving this town sooner or later. That was what she wanted, right? Otherwise, why would she have come to this godforsaken place to begin with? If we simply kept going on as we had, then parting was going to be awfully hard. Hard? For whom exactly? She'd be leaving this place with her memory of it entirely deleted. Nothing hard about that. Better stop thinking about this. In any case, I was at the station. No point in wasting any more time in useless pondering. Once I boarded the trolley and took a seat, I decided that I'd take a scenic detour. After all, it was going to take me all of 30 minutes to do my shopping. I didn't particularly feel like returning home that early. So, where to? Speaking of which, I hadn't been back to my apartment on 5th in an entire month. I'd cleaned the place up right before embarking on this assignment, but there was probably a layer of dust an inch thick everywhere by now. Might as well make an appearance there. A few minutes later, the trolley arrived at 5th Street Station. Now, 5th had a few things in common with my old hometown. The spidery roads and the twisting alleyways, for instance. But the difference, and this overshadowed everything else, was whereas the city was dirty and black with soot, this one was clean and white with snow. Pretty soon I was standing in front of my apartment's door. I dug into my pockets and found my key. This had been sitting inside my coat for how long now? I went inside. The lights were off, the curtains were shut, and the interior was dark. But there was a fine film of dust everywhere. But otherwise, things were actually pretty neat. I sat down on my bed and closed my eyes for a bit. 3 years. That's how long I'd been living here now. And yet I feel no attachment to the place. No rush of emotion, no feeling of homecoming. Just my bed and my desk and my books and a bunch of bric-a-brac that I didn't care much about. But then something on the wall caught my eyes. Wait a second. What was this doing here? I mean, this was a nice one-piece dress. Very cute, very well made, and all. But it stood out like some alien artifact in my barren apartment. I didn't remember buying it for sure. Maybe someone had delivered it here on mistake? But if that was the case, wouldn't they have just left a delivery notice instead of unlocking the door and coming in? This didn't make any sense, but I didn't have any other ideas. Well, I was at a loss for what to do with it, but I knew I wouldn't what I wouldn't do, throw it out. Might as well leave it here until the owner came back to reclaim it. After all, I wouldn't be living here until my work with law was done, and no one, least of all me, knew how long that would take. In the end, I locked up and left, with the dress still on the wall. I didn't know exactly what time it was, no working clocks in town after all, but I did know that it was still well before noon, so I had not managed to burn that much time at all. The steeple of the old church caught my eye when I stepped outside. Now, given all that had happened, the sight didn't particularly fill me with joy, but I had nowhere else to go, so hey, why not? The streets were all but deserted. Strangers passed by each other in silence. Their footsteps babbled on concrete and mud before they, too, were forgotten. Fifth was always this way. Not that this came as any surprise. People of my profession lived here. And so long as we were on assignment more than we were off, this would continue to be the city where memories came to die. Now, there was another church in town on 2nd Street, but it was much newer and larger than the one here, so most guides took their religious guests there and not here. Eventually, the number of people who attended this church dwindled down to nothing. Now, only the building remained, and it, too, was falling to pieces. I opened the door and went inside. I used to come here quite often in the past. Annelier once lived here. I visited him often enough. Well, not quite. Given his position, the guy probably had a mansion somewhere. He too just came here to kill time, probably. And really, it wasn't so much to kill time as to take care of this cute little kitten who had made this place her home. Wait a second. Right. That cat that used to live with me, she was Annelier's to begin with. I just gave her a place to stay for a while. Where'd she go after Annelier died, I wonder? This church was where it all went down. Annelier, the cat, the gun. My memories of that time were vague at best. The emotions weighed down so heavily that even if I would try to recall exactly what had happened, I'd completely fail. I do remember this, though. I didn't hate him at all. It was difficult to pull the trigger. I remember that, too. Annelier is dead, and so is Maria. I couldn't tell you what she and I were to each other. Maybe we were lovers. Maybe we were just acquaintances. Didn't really matter. I never said a word to her about what I felt for her, and she never said a word to me either. What use was there in talking of tomorrow in a city that had no future, only a fleeting present and a dead past? I think that's how we felt back then. That was why we let the future go, because we knew that it'd melt away in our hands if we even reached out for it. Well, to be fair, that feeling hadn't changed very much over the years. But back then, Maria was my life. I probably would have died in the dark alleyways of my old city if it hadn't been for her. No one would have known I ever existed. This was all ancient history. I wouldn't even have been thinking any of this if it weren't for that dream. Such a bad dream for such a splendid dawn. No wonder my morning today was a mess. I sat on one of the benches and closed my eyes. Time passed. Everything inside of me was quiet and still, and abnormal. If I came home like this, La was going to be worried and sick about me. She knew me too well by now. I could just see her looking up at me, her eyes wide with alarm. No way. That was going to suck. So I finally stood up and walked out. Did we even get the groceries? I started walking toward the trolley station. The clouds were heavy and gray as ever, but the snow hadn't started falling yet. Might as well catch some lunch at Aroma and go shopping after that. I hoped La would be able to fend for herself back at home. That? Why? Why would you do that? There was someone quite unexpected at Aroma when I got there. Well, no, not really. She was quite expected, but it was still kind of a shock to see her. I figured. Welcome. Oh, hi, Blackiris. Rook shot me a sheepish, awkward look as I walked in, so I turned my attention to Lips, who was standing right next to him, cleaning the countertop. Well, you see, kinda dangerous to make her hole up in her apartment till the heat's off her, so I'm hiding her here. Any problem with that? And of course Jackal's here too. Uh-huh. I nodded, but man, it was so funny watching him get flustered this way. Made me want to laugh. Come on, dude, wipe that evil grin off your face already. I didn't do anything wrong, I swear. And I agreed with that. He hadn't done anything wrong at all. In fact, I'd say that for the first time in his life, he'd done something right. Lips, in the meantime, had polished the countertop with such relentless fervor that it now outshone the overhead lights. Now, I couldn't read her as easily as I could La, but it was still pretty obvious that she was feeling pretty embarrassed. Oh, I almost forgot. Here, this is yours, I believe. I took her gun out of my pocket and handed it over to her. She almost dropped the rag she had been using to clean the countertop in response. You've been walking around with this in your pocket the whole time. Well, it's not as if I wasn't guilty of the same thing, but what am I supposed to do with this now? Point. But I'm in the same situation here. So let's see. Why don't you ask Rook to dispose of it for you? He's good at that kind of thing, after all. I was lying. There were a million different ways I could have disposed of that gun, but this one was the most interesting, you see. Rook cleared his throat with exasperation. I watched him as he began preparing to brew some coffee. This was getting more and more entertaining by the second. Looked like I made the right choice. Hey, tell me, what's been going on with you these days? Haven't seen you around these parts in forever. Oh, right. Well, I got pretty sick for a while, so now it was my turn to get all embarrassed. I was richly deserved, too. Only the most sloppy guide would let his guest catch a cold in the manner that I did. Okay, why is this? There it goes. Man, how could ya? Rook just shook his head slowly. Lips, on the other hand, looked at me apologetically. I'm so sorry. This is all my fault, isn't it? Oh, that's how. Hey, all's well that ends well, eh? Poor La. It was nice and all for them to say that, but in the end it was still my fault that she had to go through all of that. I have to be a lot more careful with her from here on out. She's doing a lot better though, eh? She's off shopping for stuff right now? No, actually, she's at home. Rook and Lips looked at each other, then back at me. Obviously, this came as some kind of surprise. I was getting bad at feeling the expressions on their faces, so I asked, "What is it?" Huh? But we saw her just a bit ago. Right? He turned to Lips, who looked bewildered for a second, but then nodded. Yeah, I saw her around the trolley station when I went to buy some dishwashing detergent. She was far away, and on top of that, she was already in the trolley, so I couldn't say hi to her or anything. I thought you were with her anyway. She was at the station? Alone? Lips shot me a strange look, something between a frown and a grimace. Too bad. There was something she wasn't telling me. Maybe she didn't want to say it, but I wasn't about to back down either. The staring match continued for some time, but finally she sighed and said, Your superior was with her. Dexter. But they just met yesterday at the hospital, really. Unless something happened while I'd gone to get her prescription filled. Maybe they just bumped into each other. Pure kind of coincidence, like, you know? Perhaps. I don't think that's perhaps. This was obviously his clumsy way of making me feel better about the situation, so I nodded, but in actuality, stay in this game long enough and you'll know that there's no such thing as a coincidence. There was no way that Dexter could have coincidentally come around here to shop, coincidentally bumped into La, and coincidentally boarded the trolley with her. In other words, La had pulled a fast one on me. She'd stayed at home in order to meet up with him. La, why did you do that? Yeah, we'll find out why La did that next time. So, thanks for watching. See you next time.